This episode is proudly sponsored by Hasa, the trusted choice for liquid chlorine. It's better because it offers the highest purity, works instantly, and contains no added CYA. By the bottom feeder, professional-grade battery-powered swimming pool vacuum system, it sucks to clean pools, so cleaning pools sucks less. Get $100 off the bottom feeder with code DVB100. Skimmer, trusted by over 30,000 pool service professionals across North America. Skimmer software helps you save time, grow revenue, and boost your 5-star reviews. Whether you're just starting out or expanding your team, Skimmer's easy-to-use tools and expert support have you covered. Upgrade your business in 2025 with Skimmer. Try Skimmer for 30 days for free at getskimmer.com/poolguy.
The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show.
Hi, welcome to the Pool Guy Podcast Show. In this episode, I'm going to unpack some of your tougher YouTube questions. When people leave comments, I can answer them, usually with 1 or 2 sentences. And in this podcast here, I unpack these questions in more detail for you so that you can get actually more help from other people's comments and questions. Join my coaching program and take your pool service to the next level. Connect with other pool pros in your area, gain valuable knowledge, and transform your business with personalized one-on-one advice from me. With over 36 years of experience, I'm here to help you succeed like never before. Learn more at poolguycoaching.com. And the first question is, why can't you just backwash your DE filters? You talk like a good cleaning to clean off the grids really well or what? I think the question was basically, I was talking about having to stop and take the filter apart. And of course you can backwash a DE filter, but you may not know this, or you may be new to the industry, or you may be new to pool care in general. Backwashing the filter is not the same as cleaning the filter for many reasons. Well, for a sand filter is a little bit different, but I'm going to focus on a DE filter here because this is where the question is. And the DE filter has diatomaceous earth coating the grids. And this is like, once it gets wet, it becomes like a clay-like material that coats the grids. When you backwash the filter, you're actually reversing the flow of water. The grids actually puff out, and technically or theoretically, the DE gets knocked off the grids, and with the water going out in the backwash mode, it'll flush the dirt and DE off the grids, and then you can add more diatomaceous or fresh diatomaceous earth to the skimmer, and it'll recoat the grids. This can be done probably 2 or 3 times in between cleaning the DE filter, because it's not something that's an exact science where if you backwash it, all the DE comes off and dirt comes off the grids. Some of it will come off the grids, some of it won't. Some of it's actually in the tank itself, in between the grids. Some of it may be on the bottom of the tank, maybe on top of the manifold. So this doesn't work all the time to clear the filter entirely, but it's a way to lower the PSI or the filter pressure down in between taking the lid off the filter and hosing off the grids and completely cleaning the filter out. And there is a limit to backwashing. One way to know if you've reached this limit is when you open up the backwash valve, when you put it in backwash mode, depending on if you have a multi-port or a push-pull piston, and you turn it on, you turn the pool back on, and nothing but clean water comes out. Then what you can do, of course, is you can turn everything off again, put it back in filter mode, turn it back on for about 20 seconds, and then put it back into the backwash mode, turn the pump on, and see if anything comes out. Sometimes you'll get a little bit of dark, muddy looking water, maybe for a few seconds, and then it's clear water again. Now, if you don't get a continuous stream of dirty water, muddy looking water for 20 or 30 or 40 seconds when you're backwashing it, this indicates that the grids have the diatomaceous earth coated on there in a form where backwashing won't knock it off. So it's more of a harder clay-like form. It's kind of hard to describe it, but there are different kind of consistencies of clay. I guess you could say that when the filter fails to backwash, the diatomaceous is more like a Play-Doh kind of feel to it, or kind of like the clay you buy at I was going to say Toys R Us, but they don't exist anymore, versus kind of like the powder that would just come right off when you rub your finger on it. And when it gets to that point, backwashing does not work anymore. you'll have to take the filter apart and hose it off. And when you're hosing off the grids, you'll notice that it's really taking a lot of water pressure to knock the diatomaceous off the grids, diatomaceous earth off the grids. And that indicates that it was definitely time to clean the filter. So backwashing works to a point, and then it fails because the grids or the filter itself is just too compacted with DE. The DE is too old and it's really stuck onto the grids, and that means you have to do a full filter cleaning at that point. Another question here is, you mentioned treating a pool outside of trichlor tablets with liquid chlorine. If your stabilizer is already at, say, 70 range, would you just add enough liquid to treat the whole week in one visit? Or are you treating it multiple times? So what I'm asking, would you add a whole week's worth of desired chlorine at once, raising it to 20 part per million, or do you ask pool owner to add throughout the season? I think this is something that it's important for the service pro to realize, is that liquid chlorine does have its limitations. Since it has no cyanuric acid or stabilizer, what this person is asking is, how do you maintain a pool on a pool route with just liquid chlorine? Now, there are a couple things you can do. You can get a liquid chlorine feeder, and this will allow you to use liquid chlorine at the pool site without having to manually add it. It's automated, and chlorine will be added to the pool during the week, depending on where you set the liquid feeder. But in the majority of the cases, there is no liquid feeder at the pool, and you have to manually add liquid chlorine. Now, you can add enough chlorine to last maybe 3 or 4 days. I don't think you can add enough to last a week with the cyanuric acid level at 70 parts per million. And that's why trichlor tablets are popular, because then you can have a slow release of chlorine in the pool. Of course, the drawback with trichlor tablets is they add cyanuric acid to the pool. And I'll touch on a second question regarding that in a second. Someone asked on a different video. But basically, you can't really use liquid chlorine and add it all at one time. Although I mentioned in the comment in my reply that there is a local pool company here. He's an old timer. He does a lot of chemical onlys, and he also does a lot of full service pools, and he only uses liquid chlorine. He doesn't use tablets, doesn't use calhypo or dichlor. How he manages this, he has his techs, and this is directly from one of the techs that's working for him. He would have them pour in 2 gallons of liquid chlorine at every time they visit that stop in the summertime. No matter what the chlorine reading was, he would just have them pour in 2 gallons of liquid chlorine. Now, this may sound illogical because you're wasting product, but it's something that has worked for him, and he's been doing this for decades. He's a really old guy, and this is how he trains his techs, and it seems to be effective. His cyanuric acid levels, I think he keeps them around 80 parts per million. Now, the problem is, if you know anything about cyanuric acid, it'll protect the chlorine up to how much cyanuric acid is in the pool. So, for example, if you're at 50 parts per million, it'll protect it to 5 parts per million, and then whatever else that's in there, whatever part per million that's above that, will not be protected, and then the sun's UV rays will burn off faster. Now, there's a lot of other factors, the pool use, how big the pool is, what the UV index is in the summer, but this seems to be somewhat effective in Southern California, his method here of putting 2 gallons in no matter what the chlorine reading is, and it's something that he's been doing again for a long time, and it's been effective, but it's not really something that I recommend because it's not the most effective way to do this. I think a combination approach is perfectly fine for pool service, using 1 tablet in the floater, maybe 2 tablets depending if the pool's really big, and then using liquid chlorine as your primary sanitizer. So what you would do is that you would get to the stop and you would put a tablet in the floater. I'm just going to say it's a 14,000 gallon pool for sake of argument. You put the floater in the tablet, and then you'll notice the chlorine level is at 3 parts per million. I don't have any problem with you adding a gallon of liquid chlorine and bringing it up to 10 parts per million. And then whatever's excess will burn off over the course of a few days. The tablet should stabilize the chlorine and release a small amount. And you're not adding a lot of cyanuric acid to the pool at this point using 1 or 2 tablets. Now, 2 tablets would be for like a 20,000 gallon pool. 1 tablet would be for a 15,000 or less gallon pool. And then you would use liquid chlorine to bring the chlorine level up. And according to Bob Lowry, you're losing about 1 part per million per day. So if your cyanuric acid level is at 70 parts per million, like you said here in the original question, and you add, a gallon of liquid chlorine to a 14,000 gallon pool, you're going to bring it up to about 8 or 9 or 10 parts per million. and then it's going to gradually burn off a little bit each day. We also have the tablet dissolving in the floater, which is adding chlorine to the pool. And so this is an effective way of maintaining a pool. You have liquid chlorine, and then you have a trichlor tablet, and you're not using the trichlor tablets as your primary sanitizer, using it as a secondary sanitizer. Now you can leave some liquid chlorine with the customer. If you're there on a Tuesday, you can have the customer pour it in on a Saturday, and that's a perfectly fine way to manage the pools on your route as well. We used to do that all the time back in the 90s. We would get a case of Hasa liquid chlorine and leave it at the job site, and then tell the customer, every Wednesday pour in a gallon of this, or every Thursday, and then you would put the chlorine in during your stop. They would put it in midweek. Problem with that is the customer would sometimes forget to put it in, then you would have problems with the chlorine zeroing out. So it's not something that can be done without a little bit of effort, unless you have a liquid chlorine feeder, because of the fact the liquid chlorine doesn't have any cyanuric acid. It's not a bad thing, it's just something to be aware of, and you're going to have a combination of chemicals, usually trichlor and liquid chlorine. You're only going to the pool once a week in your pool service, so you want to make sure that the chlorine level is maintained. And then another question that kind of ties in here perfectly is, have you ever done the math to figure out how many trichlor tablets would it take to increase a 10K gallon pool by 1 parts per million of cyanuric acid, or CYA? And luckily, there is a really good online calculator. It's called the poolcalculator.com, and you could put the number of gallons, and then you can also go to the cyanuric acid level and set a goal. I put it at 100 parts per million, so that this is a more accurate way of describing cyanuric acid in trichlor tablets for you. So for every 50-pound bucket of trichlor that you purchase, there's 100 tablets in there roughly, and half of the weight of the tablet is cyanuric acid. So I'm just going to give you, there's some differences, and there may be some tablets with more cyanuric acid, some with a little bit less, but I'm just going to say that half of the tablet is cyanuric acid, the other half is the chlorine. And so if you're adding a whole 50-pound bucket of trichlor tablets in a season, or 100 tablets in a season, you're adding 25 pounds of cyanuric acid. And what does it take to reach 100 parts per million? Because that's the actual level in Los Angeles County where I'm at, where the health department says it's safe still. So 100 parts per million of cyanuric acid, it takes about 8 pounds of cyanuric acid to reach that level. So if you are at 100 parts per million, I should say, let me rephrase that. To get to 100 parts per million in a 10,000 gallon pool, you would need 8 pounds of cyanuric acid. So what is 8 pounds of cyanuric acid in a 50-pound bucket of trichlor tablets? That would be 16 pounds of tablets, or 32 trichlor tablets, which is about 1/3 of the bucket of tablets, which is pretty amazing if you think about it. You're adding 32 tablets in the course of the season, and that raises the cyanuric acid to 100 parts per million. Now, if you're just going for 1 part per million like he was asking, it would be about 1.3 ounces, but that's much harder to describe than going to 100 parts per million. And of course, if you wanted to go to 150 parts per million, which is kind of typical if you're using trichlor as your primary sanitizer, that would be 13 pounds or 26 pounds of the bucket. So about half the bucket, half a 50-pound bucket of tablets will raise the cyanuric acid level in a 10,000 gallon pool to 150 parts per million, which is a pretty high level of cyanuric acid and is something to be aware of. So how much does the trichlor bucket contain again? About half the weight is cyanuric acid, which means that if you had a 50-pound bucket of trichlor tablets to a 10,000 gallon pool, you're adding 25 pounds of cyanuric acid. And if you really want to do the math on what 25 pounds of cyanuric acid would be in a 10,000 gallon pool, you're actually going to be at 300 parts per million of cyanuric acid if you use a 50-pound bucket of trichlor tablets in a 10,000 gallon pool during the season, which is a lot of cyanuric acid to add to the pool, especially a 10,000 gallon pool. Now, of course, the math is different with a larger pool. This is just 10,000 gallons. If you had a 30,000 gallon pool, of course, you wouldn't have that kind of effect on it. In fact, if you had a pool that large, and I'll just put that in here so you get an idea that it's not the end of the world with the cyanuric acid and trichlor, but it is something to keep an eye on But if you had a 30,000 gallon pool, to get to 100 parts per million, you would need 25 pounds of cyanuric acid, which is the whole 50-pound bucket of trichlor tablets. So the larger the pool, the less effect, of course, it has. The smaller the pool, the larger concentration of cyanuric acid you'll be putting in by using the trichlor tablets. And here's a question about a pump install. It says, I'm replacing my Pentair pump with another Pentair pump. The old pump only has 2 black wires connected to it, no ground, and there's no bonding wire. Does this sound right? Well, of course this isn't correct, and a lot of times someone will do it themselves and not put the right wires. They'll put different color wires. I've seen brown wires, I've seen yellow wires, all different things that people will use because they're handy. Most licensed installers will use black or red wires for the load wires, and then of course the ground wire will be green. And it sounds like whoever installed this didn't put the ground wire in. The bonding wire is something different that should have been put in when the pool was built. The bonding wire is to ground the pump, so that motor or pump, so that when you touch it, you're not going to get shocked. And this is something that's usually done with the pool build, because then they put the bonding wire, usually attach it to the skimmer, or if there's a ladder or something, they'll use that. And it's something that, of course, if you don't have that, then maybe your pool was built at a time where they weren't bonding the equipment. And if you can look that up and you can research bonding. You can actually do an after fact bonding in some cases. But as far as the ground wire, I'd really think the simplest thing for this person, and I suggested you just buy a new wire whip, and this has the 3 wires in there. A 230 volt wire whip should have the 2 black wires, or black and red wire, and the green ground wire. You'll remove the current wire whip that's there, put the new wire whip in there, and you'll connect the 2 load wires to the time clock, the timer, and then of course the ground wire will be connected to the pump. And that's kind of how you do it. You just replace what's not there properly. I've seen this happen a lot where they install something without the proper wires or with the wrong wire colors, and it's really confusing. But simply put, a 230 volt pump should have either a red and black wire and a green ground wire going to it from the timer or wherever it's connected, or the junction box. And that's kind of the standard wiring for that particular pump. It's not rocket science. It's just 2 colors basically, red and black or black and black, and then a green ground wire. And that's pretty simple. And replacing the wire whip is the solution if it's not wired that way, or if it doesn't have all the wires inside the wire whip for you to install it properly. If you're looking for other podcasts I've recorded, you can find those on my website, swimmingpoollearning.com. Just click on the podcast icon on the banner. It'll take you to a drop-down menu of other podcasts I have recorded there. And if you're interested in the coaching program, you can learn more at poolguycoaching.com. Thanks for listening to this podcast. Have a great rest of your week, and God bless. This episode is brought to you by Hasa, providing products that deliver clean, healthy water for every aspect of everyday life. The bottom feeder battery-powered vacuum system, portable, powerful, and only weighs 12 pounds. And Skimmer. Get Skimmer, America's #1 pool service software. Podcast listeners can try Skimmer for free at getskimmer.com/poolguy.